What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to go over a couple players that I think are buy lows and sell highs ahead of week 3. I think now that we've had 2 weeks of NFL action, we can make a lot more educated decisions about how we necessarily want to evaluate players going forward. There's definitely always going to be a lot of week 1 overreaction. I commented on how several of you could capitalize on that. I myself traded for Mike Williams in between week 1 and week 2, and I feel pretty great about that one. So that just shows how well you can really work to improve your roster in between each week, especially if you just make sure to help yourself by avoiding the overreactions and the emotional swings of each week. So trading is definitely the way that I find myself improving my teams the most over the course of the season. I absolutely love doing it. It's probably my favorite part of fantasy. So I definitely love to help you guys with that as well. So if you guys do end up having any trade questions for me, please do feel free to let me know in the comments. I'd love to help you out and let you know what I think about it. It's just a lot of fun for me, and I'll do my best to get back to you. I do a pretty good job getting back to everybody. If this is your first time on the channel, I do want to thank you for stopping by. If you do feel like any of this information is very useful to you, please do give me a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you get notifications when new videos are posted. We are posting over 3 videos a week. There are weekly rankings for you to use every single week on the website. Those are all completely free for you to use, so no reason for you guys to not at least take a look at them. They're free, can't hurt. Just get another opinion on those start-sit questions as well. But yeah, with that, let's get into the first set of buy lows. So the first and biggest buy low for me this week is going to be Dalvin Cook. He's still clearly an elite running back in the NFL, and he just doesn't have any touchdowns yet. He had over 20 touches in week 1. He was still very involved in week 2, and the Vikings just couldn't get the ball moving. They were in a really poor game script all of week 2 against the Eagles, so it's not all that surprising. They ended up with a pretty poor fantasy outing, but he's still clearly the lead back there in an offense that I expect to score quite a bit. He's got a history of being a top 10 running back over the course of a season. I still have him ranked as a top 7 running back the rest of the season, and it's just really reasonable to expect there's going to be plenty of touchdown regression for him. I'm more than willing to pay running back 1 value for him, and I think that there are definitely going to be some managers that are panicking after 2 pretty lackluster weeks. It's pretty interesting to see how a lot of these top-tier running backs have really busted to start the year. A lot of managers are worried about Eckler and Barkley and CMC, and Taylor had his bust week this week, so a lot of these running backs I think could be buy lows, but Dalvin Cook has not had a single good game so far over the course of this season, and I certainly expect that to change, so he'd be probably my number 1 target this week in terms of a trade. Next buy low for me is going to be Darnell Mooney. He actually made this video last week, and I know that many of you may have made a trade for him, and you're probably pretty upset with me, but I'm going to double down on it. The Bears have just had some really historically low passing volume to start the season. I think they're the first team since like 1980 to only complete 8 or fewer passes in each of their first 2 games, so like that's just not going to happen over the course of the entire season. They're obviously going to be a run-first offense, but the defense is going to give up plenty of points. They're not always going to be in games against the Packers that are going to try and run the clock out. So I expect there to be a pretty significant uptick in passing volume. They're not going to be a top 10 passing offense or anything, but there will be a lot more than 11 pass attempts like there were on Sunday night. So that alone is going to see an uptick for Mooney. And Mooney's still just by far the best deep threat they have. He's really the only shot this offense has at being explosive. So I think he's still going to flex in as a nice boomer bust flex option at a minimum going forward. And we saw how well he could perform last year. He was over a 1,000-yard receiver, and I still expect him to take that leap forward this season. And really, he's free now. If you paid for him last week, you maybe had to trade a little bit, but now there are definitely people just looking to drop him. I know Cole Kmet, his running mate's probably going to get dropped in a lot of leagues, and he's a guy that I'd probably be willing to at least look out on waivers as well. I just expect this Bears offense to be a little bit better, especially the passing game of it. So if you can trade, you can get Mooney for basically free, and I'm more than willing to do that because I think he's just got a lot more upside than a lot of guys that are going to be sitting on your bench. Next guy I'm looking to buy low on here is going to be Kyle Pitts. Surprisingly enough, the Falcons offense does look moderately competent, which is not something I really expected coming into the season. That was my biggest concern for Kyle Pitts, so it's kind of strange to see that this offense is sort of putting up points, and Kyle Pitts has just been an absolute non-factor in that. But Kyle Pitts is still clearly on the field. He's been on the field just as much as any other player in that offense, and I think that really the defenses have just been sort of targeting in on him and letting everybody else in that offense sort of run wild. There's not really anybody else that scares them, but Drake London's showing that he is a clearly very talented NFL wide receiver. I expect Drake London to have a really great career. He'd be another guy that I'd be interested in buying in. He just didn't make the video here, but I do like Drake London, and I really love Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is a unicorn. He's going to be an elite NFL tight end. Arthur Smith mentioned that their game plan isn't built around fantasy football. It's built around winning games, and that's why Kyle Pitts isn't getting targets, but that doesn't make any sense because Kyle Pitts is their best player, and they're not winning games by not targeting him, so Kyle Pitts is going to get more involved in this offense. And really on top of that, the tight end position is just a complete wasteland. If you don't have Kelsey or Mark Andrews at this point, I guess Waller can sort of fall into that. You're sort of just throwing out darts every single week and hoping you find the end zone with a player. You're really excited if you have like an Evan Ingram who gets 7 receptions. So Kyle Pitts has some upside that just very few tight ends have, and he's definitely worth taking that shot on because really we play fantasy to win our leagues. We're not trying to get second or fourth or whatever. And if Kyle Pitts truly does unlock his potential, Kyle Pitts could be an absolute league winner, and now you don't have to pay that third round draft capital that you did during the draft season. Next guy I want to talk about here is going to be Russell Wilson. I know this one might be a little contradictory or a little bit of a hot take just because I think a lot of people are sort of writing off Russell Wilson at this point because of just how absolutely brutal the Broncos have looked through weeks 1 and 2. But you have to remember that Russell Wilson's still a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's been elite for the last 10 years of his career, and he's not suddenly going to stop because he has another bad head coach. Pete Carroll's been a really poor offensive head coach his entire career, and it didn't really stop Russ. So I'm not necessarily super worried about the head coach getting in the way. I think a lot of people are forgetting that the starters didn't play at all in the preseason, and they have a new head coach, new offensive coordinator. Everything about that whole entire organization is brand new right now, and I think it was unrealistic of us to expect this offense to really hit the ground running, given the fact that everybody's new and they didn't get any preseason reps. So why are we really all that surprised that they look rusty to start the year? Russ, he still looked okay. He looked decent in week 1, and in week 2, I know it was tough, but the Texans defense was actually just really tight, playing some really tight coverage on these Broncos receivers. The Broncos did lose Jerry Jeudy at some point during this game, so it was really just Sutton versus the entire Texans defense, and that's why you saw Sutton really blow up for such a high percentage of this team's yards. But, I mean, this offense is going to be elite. They still have a decent offensive line. They've got 2 really good running backs. They've got 2 really good receivers. KJ Hamler should be back soon. Hopefully Jeudy doesn't miss too much time. So there's plenty of weapons for this offense to absolutely thrive, and we haven't found the Broncos in a game where they actually have to score a lot of points yet. We've seen them be able to be moderately conservative, especially towards the goal line. They've settled for field goals and some goal line stands several times, and I think they're going to find themselves in a lot of shootouts this year, especially within their own division, where they just can't afford to do that. So there's going to be a lot more opportunity for this offense to just be forced to score points, and I still believe in Russell being able to do that. I still have him ranked as a top 8 quarterback the rest of the season. I personally traded for him in one of my leagues last week, especially because I was thin at quarterback, so I love Russ. I think he's an elite quarterback. He's going to have a really good year still. There's plenty of talent on this offense, and I'm not writing them off at all yet. So definitely go get Russ if you're thin at quarterback. If you lost Trey Lance, if you lost Dak, I think the Russ manager is going to be pretty willing to move off of him just because of the slow start. Last buy low for me here is going to be Leonard Fournette. He's still getting just absolutely insane volume. He had 23 carries this last week along with a few targets, and he's just one of the few true workhorse running backs left in the NFL. Most running backs, you see a split time, they'll come off on third down. They won't be there in the 2-minute drill. They won't get goal line work, but he gets all of it. He just doesn't have a touchdown yet this season, so that's keeping his total season numbers low, but the touchdowns are going to come. He even tweeted about it. He apologized to all his fantasy owners for not having one yet and said they're coming, and I believe him. This Bucs offense is going to have to score plenty going forward. They're capable of doing so. They've just been missing a lot of weapons, and they've played some pretty decent defenses. We just saw the Cowboys defense really stifle the Bengals this week, and we saw that the Saints defense, we expect them to be good this year, so I'm not at all surprised that they've struggled a little bit to move the ball, but I expect better days ahead for this whole Buccaneers offense, and Fournette's going to be a big part of that. He's going to get plenty of touches inside the goal line. He's going to have probably double-digit touchdowns when the season ends, and he's going to be a 1,000-yard rusher and catch 50 balls, so he's going to be a top 10 running back this year just because of the sheer volume. He doesn't even have to be great. And if he looks good, which I think he has so far, he does have that top 5 running back upside like we saw at the end of last year. So first sell high for me is going to be James Robinson. Aside from the 37-yard rushing touchdown he had in this week 2 matchup against the Colts, he had 22 other carries for a total of 26 yards. He's also largely uninvolved in the passing game. That doesn't surprise me because of their draft capital invested in Travis Etienne. Etienne's clearly going to be the pass-catching running back there. And I just don't expect the Jaguars to hold many multi-score leads throughout the course of the season. You saw them be able to lean on their running game because they were really just trying to burn clock. So I will give him some credit in that the Colts knew they were going to try and bleed clock, so it's not shocking that he wasn't entirely efficient. But 22 carries for 26 yards outside of one busted play isn't really going to cut it. He's not necessarily ever been a guy that you expect to bust off huge runs either. He doesn't necessarily have that breakaway speed, so I'm not going to rely on those large touchdowns coming. And he's not getting enough work for me to really view him as a trustworthy running back 2 throughout the course of the rest of the season. I sort of view him as one of those running backs ranked 25 to 30, so a mid to low end RB3. And I think you can get running back 2 value for him. He's been a really high end fantasy producer for 2 years in his career. People are seeing him look great again, but I just don't think this Jaguars offense is going to be able to support him and Etienne. They're going to split too much for really either of them to be super trustworthy on a weekly basis. So if you can move on from Robinson and get running back 2 value for him, I'd be all in on that. Next guy I'm looking to sell high on here is going to be Antonio Gibson. I do love Antonio Gibson, the talent, and this was his second straight really serviceable performance for fantasy, although this one was pretty much saved by a 1-yard rushing touchdown in the fourth quarter. But Antonio Gibson is still a fumble away from being benched in this offense. Ron Rivera and the Commanders clearly don't want to lean on him, and they're not going to have to forever. They're going to get Brian Robinson back pretty soon, so I think Antonio Gibson is absolutely at risk of losing his starting job. He's going to lose plenty of carries to Brian Robinson, and Brian Robinson did seem like he had a bit of a hold on that goal line role, so I think you're not really going to be able to count on that 1-yard touchdown bailing you out at the end of the game anymore. Something that was also pretty disappointing for Antonio Gibson is his passing game involvement dwindled. He caught 7 passes in week 1, and that was something that really excited me about Gibson because we knew coming out of college he was a receiver in college and that we expected him to have this really extreme receiving upside, and it looked like the Washington Commanders might finally be unlocking that, but they went right back to using J.D. McKissick in this game when they found themselves trailing. So I certainly expect Gibson to be used less in the passing game in the following weeks than he was in week 1. He's going to be a low-end running back 2 for me until Brian Robinson is back. And then when Brian Robinson gets back, is he even playable? I don't know. Brian Robinson could be back in week 5, so you might only get 2 more weeks of Antonio Gibson actually being great. So I would try to move on for him. If you can get RB2 value for him, I'd love to do that. I'd love to trade him for a guy like A.J. Dillon. I'd trade him for Damian Harris. I would trade him for plenty of other running backs. So if you got Antonio Gibson, look to move him. And if you have any questions about whether or not you'd like to move him for a guy, just feel free to ask me, and I'll let you know if I think that's a good move. So sort of sticking with the theme of running backs that I think you should sell high on, I've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a sell high again. The biggest reason for me is just that he's only averaging 11 touches per game. That's just not going to be enough for him to be a consistent fantasy producer. He has been extremely efficient on those 11 touchdowns so far. He's got 2 touchdowns, and he's got a couple big runs, and he's been involved in the passing game, but you just can't be elite with 11 touches per game out of the backfield. He's not going to be a top 15 running back for the rest of the season just because that volume I don't think is going to change. The other running backs have looked serviceable as well. I think it's going to be much more of a low-end running back 2 throughout the course of the rest of the season, if not even a high-end running back 3. So if you can move on from him and get high-end RB2 value, I think I'd trade him for A.J. Dillon. He's a guy I love buying low on here. I'd trade him for Miles Sanders. Sanders looks great. There are plenty of guys that will be looking to move Clyde Edwards-Helaire for. There's just 3 running backs involved in this offense. It's going to be really hard to move on for him to continue producing at the level he's been doing because you're not really going to be able to bank on the 2 touchdowns he had in week 1 or the breakaway run he had in week 2. I don't know. I like Clyde. I think he's talented, but I just don't think he's getting enough volume to really make me trust him every single week in my fantasy lineups. The last one here I want to talk about for a sell high, and this one really does hurt me, and that's Allen Robinson. I was not at all comforted by the week 2 performance he had against the Falcons, which is strange because it seems like everybody else in the fantasy community was. I get that he had the touchdown on the opening drive. He ended up with 2 receptions for 16 yards and a touchdown on the opening drive, but he only caught 2 more passes the entire rest of the game. He had a 14% target share. And really, it just seems like when there's not a scripted play or Robinson's not his first read, which he never really seems to be because obviously Cooper Kupp's going to be your first read on a play, Stafford doesn't look to Robinson to make a play happen. He's pretty much only looking to either check it down to Higbee or the running backs or find Cooper Kupp down the field. So I don't think Allen Robinson's going to be as involved in this offense as I really thought he was going to be coming into the season. I have a lot of Allen Robinson everywhere, and I'm glad he had the decent week 2 outing so that I can try and sell high on that because I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, hey, he's their wide receiver 2. He's going to be really great. He had a touchdown called back due to a medical timeout, so he should have had a 2-touchdown game. And I get that it's nice. It's nice that they're trying to use him towards the goal line, that he might have some touchdown upside, but I don't want the receivers I play in fantasy to need a touchdown to pay off, especially in PPR, just because you can't bet on many receivers to score a touchdown. You can bet on guys like Cooper Kupp and Stephon Diggs and Devontae Adams to score touchdowns, but very few receivers score touchdowns at a high enough rate that you can want to bank on that every single week, and I'm not comfortable with Allen Robinson. I think he's going to be sort of a touchdown-dependent wide receiver 3 the rest of the season. He'll have some spike weeks because he might have a 2-touchdown game here or there, but I don't think he's going to be a guy that you can trust every single week. You're going to get Van Jefferson back. It's going to take even more targets away from Allen Robinson. And I don't know. I'm sad about it, but I think I'm out on Allen Robinson going forward. I would try to move him for wide receiver 2 value if you can. I would trade him for guys like Brandon Cooks. I would trade him for, I don't know. There are a lot of receivers I'd rather have than him just because I don't think he's going to be consistent enough that I can trust him on a weekly basis. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.